So let's get practical and talk about the first task you'll face as a SAS student, which is doing a heck of a lot of reading. Probably put the fear of God into you when we sent you Thucydides and Path to Victory, but let's talk about how you might approach that. A naive way of entering a book is to sit down, take a deep breath, and just start reading on page 1 and try and get through to page 847 or however long the day's book might be, with no real plan for note taking, constant distractions, whatever. We saw in the last videos the importance of controlling your environment and also of framing your deep work time. So you might set yourself a goal for the next 2 hours. I will read this book. Maybe it's shorter. Maybe you work in 25-minute increments with a 5-minute break. That's the Pomodoro technique, which many people recommend. So you know you can make it through 25 minutes, no matter how restless you are. Keep a timer, get up, stretch, all that. You want to be distraction-free using all the methods we talked about as much as possible. Get in a mindset of deep work. Be clear about what your goal is. My goal at first is to get an overall comprehension of what this book is about. And this is where things get different from just starting on page 1, reading straight through. To make this practical, I pulled up a random book I have saved on my computer. For a while, Springer was making all of their books available for free during COVID, so I went in and downloaded a whole bunch of big, scary science books that looked interesting. Here's one on the nature of scientific knowledge. I picked it because it looks relatively intimidating. You can see the table of contents. You can see, oh gosh, it's dense. It has footnotes. This is the kind of book that might scare a SAS student. Kind of scares me. So are we just going to start on page 1? Well, let's first try and get an understanding of what this book is all about. Well, it's from Springer. It's an undergraduate text in philosophy. Okay, it's aimed at undergrads. We should be able to handle it. Who's this guy, Kevin McCain? Well, let's Google the author, Department of Philosophy in Birmingham. And more or less what we find here is he teaches undergrads. He's a science fiction fan. He likes to make philosophy fun. He's written Philosophy and Dungeons and Dragons and Philosophy and Doctor Who. Unfortunately, we didn't assign those books. Today we're looking at this one. But he seems like a cool guy. Let's give it a try. We'll get a sense of his interests. Now let's look at the title, The Nature of Scientific Knowledge. And he tells us right away what his book is all about. These books offer self-contained textbooks aimed towards undergraduate level that covers all areas of philosophy. Okay, this is an intro book. We should be able to figure it out. And he tells us in his preface that this particular book is about a comprehensive and accessible introduction to the epistemology of science. Well, there's a big word. And because we're actively reading, even more important than reading every word on this page is probably understanding something about what epistemology is. Now, I'm sort of breaking my rules here by having the internet open, but in some cases, this might be how you start. Let's look up epistemology, the theory of knowledge, especially with regards to its methods, validity, and scope. Epistemology is the investigation of what distinguishes justified belief from opinion. Okay, well now we're learning something. We're going to make a note in whatever note-taking system we have. And even though we haven't really read anything yet, we've got a decent sense of what this book is about. You can often tell a lot, not just by looking at the author's bio, but by who he or she thanks. The acknowledgments will usually be up front or at the end, and they can often tell us who someone's dissertation advisor was, who they studied under. And as you go through a course like SAS, you will start to recognize names and relationships. There's kind of a tree of generation to generation of some of the most influential thinkers. And when you see someone's dissertation advisor was Kenneth Waltz, you say, okay, this makes sense now, why this person is a neo-realist, whatever. Before we even start reading, let's kind of take a look and flip through the structure of the book. Every author has to make deliberate choices about how they structure an argument. And different kinds of books are structured differently. If you're reading a novel, you're going to come at it very differently than a political science book, very differently than a history book. We know this is a textbook, so probably it's going to go topically through a range of things. And we can see at a glance this author has divided the book into parts and then chapters. So let's look at the parts. We've got an introduction, general features of knowledge, where he talks about, okay, let's look at the chapter titles. Traditional account of knowledge, okay, there's going to be some history of the idea, belief, truth, justification, evidence. Okay, so right now I've got some key ideas in my mind that I probably need to get out of this book. What are each of these things? What have people said about them? We can kind of skim in there. Okay, he's presenting under belief a range of different philosophical theories of belief. I have no idea what these are. Representationalism, dispositionalism. But it's a safe bet he's taking us on kind of a window tour of the key ideas throughout history of what belief are. Notice he's got a conclusion in each chapter. That's helpful. Maybe we can get the gist of each chapter from that. Okay, but let's go back to parts. General features of knowledge. Part 2, knowledge of scientific claims. Okay, so we're moving from knowledge into how science uses knowledge. Looks like he's building up an argument here. Part 3, challenges to scientific knowledge. Well, that's interesting. Skepticism about the external world. Things are starting to come to my mind as I look at this. My first thought when I saw that was, are we real? Thinking about the claims that maybe we're all living in a simulation. If I was potentially going to write a paper about that someday, maybe I'd make a note in my note-taking system linking to that. And then someday when I want to write about, are we simulations, I can link back to this undergraduate philosophy book. How do we know things? Skepticism about induction, irrationality, anti-realism about science. Okay, well now we're starting to connect to the modern world. I'm suddenly thinking about fake news, two different realities Americans live under, and I'm already making links between this book and how it might fit in to things I care about and study. Part 4, social dimensions of scientific knowledge. Okay, so we start with knowledge, how science uses knowledge, challenges to knowledge, and now social dimensions of knowledge. And I'm thinking about a SAS book I read, Thomas Kuhn's book about paradigm changes, and this argument that scientific knowledge always occurs in a scientific community. He'll probably mention Kuhn. I don't know, but I'm going to make a note here linking this back. And then he's got some forward-looking stuff and then an index. Okay, so I have a pretty good idea of what this book is going to talk about, even though I haven't actually read it yet. And I'm already getting ideas about what are the main takeaways I should get. There's going to be a lot of definitions about things like belief and knowledge. Maybe I want some basic ideas about what have different people said about each of these things. I'm building a skeleton in my mind of what I should be digesting from this book, and I could probably start planning my notes accordingly. We know a lot about this book, and we haven't even read it yet. More about the author. All right, let's look at chapter 1. All right, this is awesome. He's giving us an abstract for each chapter. So without even reading the entire chapter, we can digest the main ideas. He's going to tell us what he's going to tell us. Then he's going to tell us. There's all this dense text. This one doesn't have a conclusion. Let's look at chapter 2, since that was just an intro. There's another abstract. Good. Keep flipping the pages. Conclusion. Oh, wonderful. He is giving us a conclusion, telling us what he just told us. And he's going to continue this on. This is a very nicely structured book that should be very easy to digest the main argument. So now we could probably read through every abstract, every conclusion, and get a decent sense of what this book is going to tell us. I'm not saying you should limit your reading to that, because it's important to go deep into these ideas, deep work, flow, not just get a wave-top reading. But now you've got a scaffolding to hang all your insights on. You know where he's going in the book, how he's going to build up an argument. Now it remains to be seen to dive in to each chapter and assess, how is he actually making an argument? Is his abstract well supported? What kind of evidence is he bringing? I'm looking through here and seeing propositions P. He's going to start doing some philosophy stuff. Here's those isms we saw. He's going to give us definitions of different beliefs. So we want to ask ourselves, what's the argument? can we reconstruct the book's argument, and what evidence supports it? Very, very dense book, but he's got a lot of citations from previous authors. He is laying out propositions that we have to interpret. So we got a decent sense now of how this book is going to work. All right, how long did we spend on that? Maybe 7 or 8 minutes. But now we've got a pretty good scaffolding to go back and read the book. We know what kind of notes we're looking for, how to approach each chapter, and now we dive in. Let's start reading, and off we go. And as you go, you can figure out how much attention you should be giving to each section without necessarily reading every single word, skimming where you need to, but really being able to grab in and dive into the essential parts. Now, I said earlier, different kinds of books take different kinds of reading. I read fiction slowly because I love the play of language itself, particularly literary fiction. It's meant to be savored. Like a fine wine, I read every word. If it's commercial fiction with atrocious writing, I'll probably skim more to just keep up with the plot. Political science books tend to follow a template because of the nature of the academic discipline. You will get an introduction. You will get a theory chapter that's the crux of the book. Here's what the author's argument is. And then you'll get numerous empirical chapters that prove the argument, or hopefully prove the argument, or at least show it's plausible. So with a political science book, that gives you some ideas about what to digest. What's the argument? Can I reproduce the argument? Do I know all the key terms? And then empirics. Well, how well does the author make his or her case? Why should I believe this? How does it fit with other arguments? Where might the argument be weak or wrong? We can approach each book with a set of questions. History is different. History is less theoretical. It's more about telling a certain story, hopefully well-grounded in evidence. So the question we might ask there is, what's the story this author is trying to tell? What's it in contrast to? Why is the author telling this particular story about history, interpreting the way he or she does? And how well does he or she use evidence? So you approach each book with a set of questions to kind of interrogate the main ideas, and it will draw your attention to the key features. And over time, this becomes more and more instinctual. Every book is different. They're not formulaic. But if you approach each book in its entirety, starting with the bottom line up front, what's this about, diving into the skeleton, and then going into the details, you will be far better equipped to have control over your study session and what you want to take from the book. And I encourage you to approach your reading this way and see what that does for you.